If you don't understand that the central fact of American political life is that the establishment has one political priority right now, and only one, which is preventing Donald Trump's return to power, I say this not to be insulting, but simply to observe reality that it is impossible to have any understanding of what's happening in the United States politically. It is such a basic, central, defining, driving fact of all of American political life that establishment forces are arrayed in every way imaginable against Donald Trump, that a failure to recognize that basically means that there's no way to understand anything meaningful about American politics. Let's remember that Nikki Haley was a person who was never taken seriously as a political candidate, as a potential opponent of Donald Trump. At the beginning, the only person who was deemed to be a possibly formidable challenger to Trump was Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor. And as a result, there were tens of millions of dollars, huge amounts of money, poured into the DeSantis campaign, only for the evidence to be pretty obvious early on that DeSantis was not really a good candidate, just not quite ready to exert the kind of retail political skills that, for better or for worse, one needs to be competitive, especially if you don't have other advantages, in order to run for president. He was awkward and uncomfortable. He lacked charisma. There was nothing really dynamic about him. Even people who thought that he was a very good Florida governor simply weren't moved by him. On top of that, there was really no space for him to maneuver in a Republican Party that was still very enamored of Donald Trump. If he criticized Trump too harshly, which he was afraid to do, it could ruin his political future. And if he didn't criticize Trump, then the question of why he was running against Trump would be the unanswerable question. He would just simply fade into the Republican primary as someone that Republican voters more or less liked, but had no real reason to opt for in order to reject Donald Trump. And so that possibility was discarded pretty quickly. There was a time when DeSantis was actually polling quite well, and without much time passing, there was a precipitous drop in the support for Ron DeSantis and a significant rise in the support for Donald Trump. Beyond the failure of DeSantis to demonstrate he had that kind of personal charisma that Donald Trump absolutely excels at, no matter what else you think of Trump, there's no denying that. What really helped Trump, what really made his victory in the Republican primary a virtual certainty, is when the Democratic Party began doing something that has never been done before in the history of American politics. They decided at exactly the moment that Trump was the leading presidential candidate, both in the Republican field as well as in the general election, at least very competitive with the incumbent president, Joe Biden, to launch a campaign, a multi-pronged campaign to try and imprison their leading political opponent, the kind of thing that we have for decades been told is the hallmark of authoritarianism and attacks on democracy in foreign countries. In fact, in 2022, the Academy Award honored a film about the imprisonment of Vladimir Putin's primary, most vocal political critic, Alexei Navalny. And this is something that we're constantly told is what happens in totalitarian countries, that the leading political opposition is barred legally by imprisoning the person who's a critic of the regime or trying to subvert the power of the regime. And of course, in every one of these instances, there's always legal justification offered for imprisoning them. There's a corruption case against Navalny. In every single country where this happens, there's always an argument that the person is corrupt, that the person has violated the law. There's never a time when the government comes out and says we're imprisoning our political opponents simply because we want to ensure there's no dissent. There's always a pretext, a legal pretext. And the very first prosecution that was brought by Trump against Trump was the worst conceivable case to do so. It was brought in Manhattan, which everybody knows is the ground zero for American liberalism. It was brought by an overtly left-wing prosecutor named Alvin Bragg. There was a huge expenditure of money by George Soros, $500,000 to a PAC devoted to Alvin Bragg's election. And the charges that were brought against Trump, that were brought as felony charges, were so trivial essentially an allegation that he made payments to Stormy Daniels to prevent her from speaking about the affairs she says he had with her, and mischaracterized it in internal Trump organization documents as something else. Usually the kind of thing that would be a misdemeanor. Alvin Bragg did everything possible to stretch it into a felony. And right away, the perception was that Democrats and liberals were going to abuse the power of law in order to try and stop Donald Trump. And this was something that didn't just come out of the blue. In 2016, the powers of the FBI and the CIA were weaponized both during the 2016 election and immediately after, throughout the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, to try and sully and sabotage Trump's campaign and then his presidency with what turned out to be an almost entirely fabricated scandal called Russiagate. And everybody watched that come from the echelons and the bowels of the CIA and the FBI, interfering in American politics, leaking stories to the New York Times and the Washington Post on a virtually daily basis, including all kinds of deranged conspiracy theories that turned out to be untrue. There were promises made of top-level Trump officials who were going to be arrested and frog-marched out of the White House for having conspired with the Kremlin to hack into the emails of the DNC and John Podesta, only for Robert Mueller to be unleashed on the world with full subpoena power and supposedly the dream team of prosecutors, only to close his investigation after 18 months and conclude that he could find no evidence to establish that conspiracy. Not a single American, not a single one, was charged with, let alone convicted of, the core conspiracy that gave rise to the whole deranged scandal, which was the allegation that the Trump campaign had criminally conspired with the Russians to hack into those email servers. 2020 election happens, and here you have the same thing. The CIA, the FBI manufactures a lie that the Biden story was the reporting on the Biden campaign was the byproduct of Russian disinformation. That too got debunked. So you have year after year after year of establishment centers of power being abused, while at the same time financial centers of power like Wall Street and Silicon Valley pouring enormous amounts of money, sometimes 9 to 1, 90% to 10%, into the coffers of Joe Biden in order to defeat Donald Trump, and before that, Hillary Clinton to defeat Donald Trump. And so the establishment has been doing everything it possibly can do to sabotage Trump, including lying and disseminating disinformation and conspiracy theories. And they got to the point where they were so desperate that they're now even willing to try and strike Trump from the ballot to prevent people from voting for him, and even trying to imprison him. So this is the context to understand American politics, that every major center of power is united in a desperate attempt to prevent Donald Trump from returning to power. And despite that, despite how much money was poured into Nikki Haley, who became the alternative to Ron DeSantis, Trump crushed them in Iowa and won Iowa with the biggest margin of victory in the history of a contested Republican primary. And now they went to New Hampshire last night, the most possibly favorable ground for Nikki Haley for the reason I said. And here was the outcome. Donald Trump wins New Hampshire by 11 to 12 points, 54 to 43. And according to exit polling, Trump won Republican voters by 75 to 25, by 50 points. And the next state, which is several weeks away in South Carolina, which is Nikki Haley's home state, shows that Trump has a massive lead in South Carolina as well. So it doesn't matter what these people do. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter how much money they amass. All of the weapons that they have been using to dominate American politics for decades no longer works. And that is something that they have to grapple with and are confounded by. And this is the major story of our politics in 2016, since 2016, which is the collapse of the legitimacy of American institutions of power, to the point that not even indicting a presidential candidate 4 separate times on major felony charges can make a dent in the political support that they command. That is a historic development in the United States. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.